King did sign a deal with the Broncos, so everybody who thought maybe the Eagles would be interested in Marquette King, he is in Denver. But there is news on the former Eagles punter who retired, or so we thought, John. It looks like Donnie Jones retired, but he wasn't really ready to stop punting.
No, a little bit of a strange story there. I think it was a situation where the Eagles kind of indicated they weren't interested in going forward because Donnie makes a lot of money for a punter at his age. They would have liked to go cheaper there, and they certainly will. He decided, and I think this happens to a lot of veteran players after the season, after the grind, to say, I don't want to go through this again, certainly not in a new city. So he decided to go out on top. Then you rest for a couple of weeks, and you're like, it's kind of boring at home. I can still punt. And I think that's kind of what happened. And now he wants to come back, and he's still a well above average punter in this league. So I think ultimately he's going to have no trouble finding a job, and he'll just continue his career in another city.
Well, the obvious question would be, why not Philadelphia? I mean, he's a very good punter. He's been here. He's also, we've been talking a lot about Warlow and special teams. He's also the holder, which is an underratedly important position. So why not a fit in Philadelphia?
Well, it's just too much money, and the Eagles have decided they wanted to go cheaper. One of the underreported stories of last year's training camp was very, very close between Donnie Jones and Cameron Johnston, and the Eagles were almost ready to pull the trigger then and go with the rookie. And if you remember, Donnie wasn't here for OTAs and off-season work, and they went through the whole basically preseason process. And Cameron was the holder the entire preseason, and because they were trying to get him ready and trying to see if he was ready to take over that job. Ultimately, they erred on the side of caution, went one more year with Donnie. That turned out to be the correct thing to do. But they were very, very close to doing this last year, and it's just a position where they think they can go cheaper, and we'll see how it works out.
John, so they think they can go cheaper, but can they get what is it that Donnie Johnson brought to the Eagles special teams? So what was his specialty, if you will, and can they replicate that in a cheaper version?
I don't think they can replicate it, number one. By
the way, John, PT's in his glory over here that he's got punting questions.
For the first, consistency for the first part. I think that's the most important thing for any punter in this league. And Donnie Jones was very consistent for a very long time with a number of teams. And as I said, he still kicked at a high level last season. This happens a lot with punters. You just mentioned Marquette King. As far as gross and net average, that's as good as it gets, and he lost his job because he makes too much money, bottom line, for that position. And if people think they can get by with lesser punters, lesser money, and sometimes it comes back to haunt you. We'll see how it shakes out. The Eagles, I will say this right now: Cameron Johnson's the only punter on the off-season roster. I would like them to bring in some competition. I think it's always a mistake with young players if you just hand them the job and say, this is your job. I think you have to push them. You have to make them compete. And I hope the Eagles bring somebody in for competition.
So do they bring that person in? So that's free agency, or maybe they bring somebody in who's unsigned. Is there an area that you can maybe fill with? Is that an area that you can fill with college free agency post-draft?
Yeah, very few punters get drafted. And the ones that do obviously get drafted to be on the team. So, and they're obviously very, very successful on the college level. the majority of punters in this league went undrafted, so you can certainly get competent people after the draft. And I wouldn't expect the Eagles to draft a punter, but I would expect them to bring one in, as I said, to push Cameron Johnson. But he's the leader in the clubhouse.
And we know he's from Ohio State. What else do we need to know about him? Does he have the potential to be as good or better than Donnie Jones?
I can't. That's a big. He's got a very strong leg, but you can never project any rookie. I don't care who it is to have a career like Donnie Jones. You could always be hopeful. It's a guy who's been an All-Pro. He's been the Pro Bowls. He's been around for as long as he's been around for a reason. Has every basically punting record here, and he was even better before he got here because he obviously was aging. So I think it's a stretch to say any young punter is ever going to turn into a Donnie Jones, but ultimately some are that successful. The odds are certainly against them, though.
Hey, by the way, we just spent 11 minutes talking about punting.
It was the best 11 minutes of radio we've ever done.
Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. And, real quick on that, though, how underrated is that position? Being able to change the field. It's more than just a guy coming in and booting one down the field. We are talking about the punter, but I'm trying to get a sense maybe of how important was that position to the success of this team last season that maybe is underrated.
Yeah, it's very important. Field position is everything in this game, and being able to flip the field and being able to have a punter like Jones who can directionally kick it, which is a lot of times more important than just kicking the heck out of it, to be able to deaden it inside the 20, make sure it's not a touchback. I mean, all these types of things he was one of the best at for a very, very long time. And it wouldn't surprise me if a Cameron Johnston does have a better gross average, but the net average, you're probably going to see more touchbacks. You're probably going to see a guy learning on the job as far as directional kicking and situational kicking. So it's going to be a work in progress like it is with all young players. But it's like any other position in this league. You have to weigh guys who are aging and make a lot of money versus going with younger players with high upsides that may need another year or two. It's just the cyclical nature of this league.
John, yesterday when you were on, there was some breaking news right as you were on with Richard Rodgers adding depth as the tight end. He will meet the media tomorrow afternoon. And, do they look at him, do you think, to fill the void, to fill two positions, both Selleck and Burton, or do they still need to add another guy at that position?
Well, no, they still need to add another guy, and we'll see. It could be Billy Brown. They have a lot of confidence, or I shouldn't say confidence, but a lot of hope that he will develop into a good receiving tight end. He played receiver in college at a lower level in Shepherd, but they have some hope that he will eventually turn into a receiver. Rodgers is more the Selleck type. He's got a big body. The problem is he's not the best blocker in the world. He hasn't been in the past. He does have good hands, and I think he could be helpful in the red zone. He doesn't have a ton of speed. He's not going to get a lot of separation, but I think he's a younger version, a little bit better version of what Brett Selleck was. So it's not a home run, but it's another single. And the fact that you look at the guy he's projected to replace, he's a little bit better than Brent was last year.
He's also the guy who caught the Hail Mary pass in that playoff game a couple of years ago.
That's right. Now, John, is it harder and harder to find that quote-unquote good blocking tight end around the league now, either via free agency or to get one out of the draft?
Yeah, it's tremendously hard because very few teams at the college level play that type of football anymore. It's all spread offense. They're all basically receiving tight ends. They're all glorified receivers. And still at the NFL level, they play enough, personnel packages where you need that blocking tight end. It's difficult to find them. I think, I don't think it was a coincidence when Troy Nicholas signed in New England that the Eagles immediately went towards Rodgers. I think they would have preferred to have Nicholas, who's this big 270-pound guy who played at Notre Dame and learned under one of the best sort of offensive line coaches, which big tight ends do. They cross-train with offensive lines. Harry Hiestand, who's now with the Chicago Bears. That's like an old-school blocking tight end. And I think that's what the Eagles wanted. And they still might look for it in the draft in the later rounds. There's a few guys, but it is very hard to find, and it usually is more of picking somebody who's got the big body and teaching them how to block, because at most colleges they're not asked to do it. So if you're not asked to do something, it's hard to get good at it.
So now that we've heard that they've got Rodgers in the house and they've got Ertz already, does that, in your mind, take some of the attention away? Because Gesicki's name's been put out there a lot. Is that somebody that they say, all right, well, let's go in a different direction because Gesicki's not known as a blocker, he's just a pass catcher? Or is he talented enough that that's a guy that you still go that way no matter what?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. If you're at 32, you never want to pass on a guy you have rated very highly. But it would be a luxury. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense because we saw it last year with Trey Burton. I wrote about it. Trey played 27% of the snaps. And remember, Zach Ertz was injured for 2 games. So in those games, his playing time obviously spiked upwards of 60%. And also in the season finale, Zach barely played like most of the starters. So that spiked it. So if you want to be real about it, Trey Burton as the backup to Zach Ertz as sort of the receiving tight end. In the games Zach played, he played basically 20% of the time. That's 1 out of every 5 snaps. That's a luxury. Now guys like him are certainly better than Trey Burton. They certainly have a higher ceiling. So that might up the playing time a little bit. But the reality is, do you really want to waste a first-round pick on a guy who's going to play 25% of the time? I don't see the value in that.
Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. Of course, the NFL Draft is coming up. We've got full coverage of the draft, April 26th, April 27th. John McMullen with more at 973ESPN.com. A couple of national stories to kind of hit on as we get ready and closer to the draft, John. One thing that is kind of interesting on this NFL Thursday is we talked a lot about these trades. Brandon Cooks coming out the other day saying, I'm blessed to be part of an organization that's on the rise. We touched on the Rams yesterday. When you look at the NFC right now, it is clearly a stronger conference. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, it's loaded at the top. When you talk about the Eagles, it starts with them as the reigning champions. But, the Rams on paper and what they've added, they might be the most talented team in football. Minnesota is still up there as being one of the most talented teams in football. New Orleans is very, very good. And then even a tier below, the Atlantas of the world, it's just a much more difficult conference, at least on paper, than the AFC. So I think that sort of plays into it. We always talk about in the NBA, it seems that one conference is strong, one conference is weak all the time, dating back to really the 80s. I think you have that kind of situation developing in the NFL, is that if you get through the NFC side, it's going to be, you're going to beat yourself up trying to beat these teams. And whereas New England, Pittsburgh, maybe Jacksonville are really the only contenders on the AFC side. It's just it shapes up as much easier.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. So, John, they're raising ticket prices. The Eagles sent that email out. I'm sure you're not surprised by that, but some of the seats are going up now that they've got that Lombardi trophy in hand. Your reaction to the Eagles raising some of the ticket prices?
Yeah, big shocker. Just put Doug Peterson's face on it. They'll be fine. They'll throw money at them.
Now's the time to do it. Now's the time to do it.
Exactly. And Doug will throw a strike on that as well.
John McMullen, yes. Coming up. Doug Peterson throwing a strike today. He was rocking a Roy Halladay jersey.
That's nice.
They did a tribute to Roy today at the ballpark. John McMullen with all the NFL news and notes right here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Johnny, we'll talk tomorrow.
All right, thank you, guys.